Hey, it's Tom Benty Media, the Tom Benty Media podcast. I'm here with real estate investor CJ Calio. He's going to talk all about getting into the real estate market, how you can get into the market, number one, and what are some tricks and tidbits in terms of actually making some income off of the real estate market. And we're in 2023 now, so it's been hot. And I was talking to CJ before we started here, but it's been hot since COVID for the last 3 years. It's been really, really hot, the real estate market, and a lot of people claim it's going to crash, but they've been claiming that for quite some time now. So I'm really anxious to talk to CJ about the market, how we can get involved, and how we can actually make some income off of this. So thank you so much for joining me today, CJ. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on your show.
Cool. So let's start with a little just history about yourself. How did you get into real estate?
Yeah, I like to think my story is pretty interesting. Originally, real estate was not even on the map or radar. So this takes me back to when I was working my W-2 or my working professional job, which was a UPS driver. So most of you know when a UPS driver shows up, they usually have those goodies from Amazon. Well, this takes me back to when I was still in that profession. And there's this time of year where we don on that brown Santa suit. You know what I mean? Where we show up at during the holiday season, delivering those wonderful gifts and being that Santa. And for me, life was good up until that point. UPS was a good paying profession, good benefits, good retirement, and I was comfortable. I was really content where I was at. Life was going well until it didn't. And when it didn't, the shift happened during this one Christmas season where I got to don on that brown Santa suit, and I found myself in an opportunity handling so much more in volume and deliveries to the point where I wasn't seeing my family, and for me, Christmas is one of the most special times of year because you get to spend time with loved ones. And I was missing that. I was really depressed, frustrated, angry, confused. Like, is this something I want to do for the next 40 years of my life? Do I really want to continue trading time for money and miss out on the memories and the experiences I get to have with my kids and my wife? And it really put me in this position of there's got to be a different way, you know? So after this long, stressful, exhausting Christmas, I came home and I was able to finally sit down and have a serious conversation with my wife. And when I did, I proposed to her an idea. It was purely off of emotion, and I was still coming off of this downer of a Christmas season. That, hey, I would like to quit. Would you support me in that? And to my surprise, she's like, yeah, I'd support you quitting. Here's the question I have for you. One question for you. How are you going to replace your income? Uh, Not thought that far through in this process, still coming off of this emotional high. I was stumped. And the cool thing about my wife is she took notice too on how much time was spent away from us or from the family as a whole. And she started researching into opportunities that could produce some different situation for me to be home a lot more. And she found through her researching that a lot of successful people carry some level of real estate in their portfolio. Now, when she proposed real estate, being somebody who had no real estate experience, no knowledge of housing or trades, I didn't understand a lick about it. I became naturally fearful. So my mindset just dove into this. "Oh, no, this is it's a scam. I've heard it's a scam. People lose money and blah, blah, making up all these stories in my head to the point where I completely went into resistance. And I was like, you know what? You go and research real estate. Let me go do something that I know I could do. And it was tapping into my limiting mindset around I get to be the only source. I started going into startups and focused primarily around the things I knew I was capable of doing. I had a experience in yard work, so I started a landscaping company. I had experience in detailing cars. I started a detailing company. I had some experience in sales. I started some sort of aftermarket car product sales company. And the funny thing is I went down all these rabbit holes, yet I was the only source. It was only about me. And the funny thing is, like most startups, it didn't work. And I found myself 6, 9 months later in a similar position, exhausted, frustrated, angry, depressed, spent a lot of time away from family doing all these startups that required me to be present. And I was out of pocket a lot more money because they didn't work. I didn't produce the return I was looking for. So I came back a little bit more humbled to my wife because at this time, she's heavily into real estate research. She's ready to pull the trigger. She's going to all these networking events. And And I came back and I was like, you know what? I want to support you because you're my biggest supporter in this. You're my biggest supporter of my why of leaving my job. So why not be a part of what you're doing? Let me look into this real estate thing. Still a little hesitant. And I was that guy in the back of the networking rooms, arms crossed, very unapproachable, not willing to have conversations, purely based off of the fear of people labeling me. Not smart. He's a rookie. He's novice. He don't know what he's doing. And instead, what ended up happening is in the networking events, people were starting to share openly about their successes. So a lot of the stories I created around scam, fear, you're going to lose a lot of money, were being debuffed by people who were actually doing it. And they were taking the time out to spend time with me to share their experience, their wealth of knowledge, and to encourage me to take a next step. And over time, I found confidence building where I became the lead. It was no longer me in the back of the room. I was in the front of the room. I was in the room talking to everybody. I wanted to know what everybody was doing because I had a strong understanding that this method could get me to replacing my income. And after getting that confidence, we decided to pull the trigger, bought our first property, sat on it, watched it, made sure it was real and tangible. And when it was, and when it did produce what we were thinking it was going to produce, we were like, okay, we're all in, focused in on this, and just slowly over time, over a 5-year span, built up our large portfolio where we're able to leave our W-2s. Both me and my wife were both able to quit our jobs. And the cool thing about staying tried and true to a process and finding some level of success is people start to take notice. And when people start to take notice, they start to ask questions and they got interested and intrigued. And it took me back to when I was in the back of the room. These are those people that I once was. How can I help them get to where they want to be? And I fell into this beautiful opportunity of being able to mentor and guide people in our specific real estate investing strategy that we found that worked and got us to our level of success. And that's kind of where we're at today, Tom.
Very cool, man. It's a very interesting story. Give you a lot of credit for just coming to terms with your life. And not many people would have actually made that jump from a very secure, very stable life. But like you said, you weren't happy, you weren't seeing your family, and you wanted to make a change. And I also think it's interesting how you went through some struggles initially. A lot of the companies you originally started just didn't pan out, and that's not uncommon, but you kept on with it and you moved through, and here you are today, and you found some success with real estate. So talk a little bit about someone who might be in your position years ago, who has a job that they're not crazy about. It's kind of just sucking the life out of them. How do you get into real estate? Like what's a good tactic to just start the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, my suggestion to new investors is to start with your why. Why are you looking to do this? And it takes me back to my story. My why was time freedom and also to replace my income. And when I understood what my why was, the method or the strategy started to become more clear. And it goes back to the real estate's a big pie that has so many slivers in it. And finding the right sliver for you is going to be based on what your why is. So my situation again was replacing income, which then surfaced, go to meetups, go find what real estate strategies will solve my problem of replacing the income and pursue those strategies. A lot of times I see newer investors that I talk to and walk through, they don't understand why real estate. They just heard real estate's a good thing. And I like to walk them back a little bit. Okay, yeah, real estate's a great thing, and real estate's not the only way. You can do businesses, there's stocks, there's all kinds of other methods of investing that can still get you to financial independence. Why real estate? When we take it back to the vision, what are you wanting to achieve in life? For me, at that time in UPS, I couldn't see beyond the next week. And through training and habit forming around vision creation, I really understood what I want to achieve, hence my why. And I was able to build actionable steps and plans in place to achieve it, basically breaking down how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's what I would suggest for new investors. Why? Why real estate? What are your goals? And does real estate best fit your goal?
Well, what are some great goals with real estate? Like what, like you said, there's different investments. You can invest in the stock market. You can invest independently with a business, maybe someone you know is starting a business, you can invest in that. So why real estate? And real estate seems to be very, very popular. I mean, that's traditionally a great way to achieve wealth in this country is by owning property. And why is that in your view?
Yeah, in my view, real estate's a beautiful thing because it's something real, it's tangible, it's physical, it's there. It's very hard for somebody to just quote unquote steal it, pick it up and walk away with it. It's physically there. And it's something that is proven over time is a necessity. And I'm not an expert in the housing situation as a country, and I understand that there's always a shortage, right? People need places to live. So real estate's going to be a demand that's always present, always needed. And if you can find a way to get into it, it could get you something similar to what I wanted, which is cash flow. So for me, the rental space is really my focus, where I can buy and own property that somebody else will pay rent, hence producing that stream of income. And when you accumulate enough, it adds up to the point where it could replace your income. It just takes some time.
That's cool. So you say you're more interested in not necessarily flipping houses, but owning houses and then renting them out and getting income that way.
Yes. And how I like to explain my strategy that I found worked for me versus flipping is very sexy and it's very attractive and it's widely spread on social media, on TV and everything. And the thing I found that didn't work for me with flipping was it's a one-time transaction, meaning I bought, I sold, I made a lump sum of money. Well, that's great if you make a lot of money and eventually that money runs out. So it doesn't solve my problem of the stream of replacing that consistency as if it was a paycheck, which led me to looking into rentals. Rentals I buy, I keep, and when my tenant pays or when the tenants pay on time, that's consistent monthly income, I can stabilize and project out further than a flip would. And yeah, there's active investing parts in rental. And for my understanding, or from my understanding, my perspective, it's less risky because I have the luxury of time. Flippers get to work within a short window to make that large lump sum of money. And if time's not in your favor, and like we were mentioning, if the housing market does decide to change direction, well, what do you do then when your six-figure profit goes to nothing? Right? Was it all worth it? Versus me, I can wait out and be more flexible with the market going up and time it better because I'm not in a position of motivation for sale. I want to keep it for a long period of time so it's stable and consistently producing.
Cool. So when you are looking for a new property, what are some things that you look out for in terms of, well, this will be a really great investment for my needs? What are some things that come into play when you're deciding whether to purchase one property over another?
Yeah, it takes me back to identifying a market first. Where am I wanting to invest that makes sense? And it's usually just a mathematical equation. And you get to dive into a little bit of politics. So there's landlord-friendly states and there's tenant-friendly states. I am a landlord. I'm the owner of the property. I want to focus my investments in states that favor my side rather than tenants. Hawaii is a good example of that. They're a very tenant-friendly state where when you have a non-paying person, they can stay there for a long period. I had a friend have somebody basically sitting on the eviction list for almost 2 years on their property. And how does that work for you in a situation where you're depending on that stream of income? It doesn't, right? So having that market that's more in favor of a landlord is key for me. And once I find that, then it's purely around what am I looking to get? What is my ultimate goal? For me, it's cash flow. So I'm looking for properties that will rent, that will stay performing. Some key indicators are the class of neighborhood. In real estate, we label them A, B, C's, and D's. And for me, I want to stay in the more C to B area, primarily because that's right in that sweet spot where people are not quite ready to buy or qualified to buy, and they need to rent. And school districts matter, right? If you think about it, some of my target tenant base is families. When a kid's going to school and being a parent myself, I'm not looking to change schools every year. So a very good tip I would give out there is to find those good school districts that support the rental properties in your area that families may find value in staying a lot longer rather than moving every year. So those are some of the tips that I would recommend.
Very cool. And since COVID, the housing market pretty much across the United States has been really hot. What caused that? Why? So it was pretty stable, I think 2018, 2019, COVID hits, and then things just got crazy. And it's kind of like a stabilized crazy from what I understand. I'm not a real estate expert, but it hasn't gone down the way a lot of people thought it would. And a lot of people that I talk to just in networking events and just people I know, like, oh, it's going to crash. This is the year 23. It's going to finally crash. What are your thoughts? So I guess two questions. Number one, why did it explode during COVID? And number two, do you think it's going to continue in this way or continue to stabilize as it's done for the last 3 years?
Yeah, like you, I was very confused with what happened in COVID. I was expecting the complete opposite of what happened. And what I believe was the key indicator, one of the primers for the pump, so to speak, is the low interest rates. The fact that you could get these 30-year fixed mortgages at super historical low rates, which, it's incentivizing people to go and buy stuff versus where we're at today in 2023, where the Fed's hiked up rates the fastest in history, I believe, and to the point where we're hovering around like 7% for a traditional versus a year ago, you were at 2.25, 2.5% interest rate. So that's a huge gap. And in during COVID, I think the housing shortage became a real thing where people could see that I should go and buy, and builders were just building like crazy, and we're still at a negative house per buyer market. And in 2023, what I see happening is the interest rates rising is going to cause a correction of some sort. And real estate in history is based off of cycles. It's like a 10-year cycle, give or take. '08. So we're expecting in 2018, around that time frame, to go back through another cycle, and it didn't. Like, this is like the anomaly between what the history of real estate cycles have been going through. So it's very interesting for me as an investor, because I get to observe, I get to pivot based on what's happening and adjust my investment strategies to fit my method still. Despite the rates being low or high, I still get to find ways. And it really comes back to you as an investor getting creative and being moldable and adjusting your thinking around what opportunity really looks like. I see a correction, and a correction is vague because everybody's definition of a correction could be different. For me, a correction is maybe normalizing. And we may not see a crash like we did in '08, but we may see it flatten out a little bit with rates rising. And that in itself can present opportunity for investors like me.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks. I really appreciate you just providing insight in terms of really taking advantage of opportunities, because a lot of people, I think they're just scared to make that first step. They're scared to leave that job with the security, especially if you have a family. There's a lot of things to consider. But what I really appreciate about your story is that you took the leap of faith. You had some struggles, but you eventually found your footing with real estate. And you're in a position now where you have a lot of financial freedom. You get to spend a lot of time with your family. And that's what's really important. And I think if people out there can see that you went through it, you did it, that there's opportunity for them to take advantage of as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, is there any just parting words you can provide, any motivation that you can provide to someone out there that might be a little apprehensive about making that first step? What insight could you provide them as we wrap up here?
Yeah, two things come to mind when I think back about my stories. One is get out in the space, go and find networking events and go and meet people who are doing what you want to do and have what you want to have, and find ways to add value to that. That's where people really want to be, is where people are sharing value. And then the second thing is I think one of my biggest shifts in this whole growth process was redefining failure. Failure is not a bad thing when you come from a mindset of growth. Like, failure to me, my failed businesses taught me persistence, resilience, taught me the ability to see what I'm capable of doing far beyond what I knew at the time. And it's just been such a huge tool and leverage I use to continue growing, right? They're my lessons that I get to learn, to improve on, showing me things I didn't know. So redefine failure would be my next tip.
That's great. And just before we wrap up, you said about providing value at networking events. So can you go into a little bit more detail about that? Like, what do you think is a great way to provide value at these events?
Yeah, so early on when I had nothing and I was a newbie just starting, adding value was simply spreading the word of the networking event, right? Getting to meet the host, getting to meet somebody like you, Tom, and just sharing it with those people that I know. Because I see that as a like almost like a leapfrog. You get the advantage of my network by simply allowing me to share to others what Tom's doing. And that's a simple way of adding value to a space, is being their spokesperson, encouraging others to come check out Tom's podcast or come check out this networking event that I just went through. And that's huge, for especially for those who are putting it on, because we're always looking as investors to find new people to network with and share in experience and create partnerships and opportunities to learn and grow together.
That's great. And I appreciate the insight. I like having all different types of guests on, and it's really cool to just learn more about the real estate space and how people can just get involved and have that financial freedom that you're talking about, and be able to spend more time with their families and just be able to create wealth. Like they're, I think a lot of people think it might be all rigged or it's all a big scam, but I think there's actually prospects out there that are viable for everyday Americans to take advantage of. And it might not be a quick fix, but I think in the long term, there's really some great opportunities there.
Yes, I agree.
Cool. Thank you so much, CJ. I really appreciate it. And how do people can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, so our Instagram handle is at WNN Properties.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And please follow CJ on Instagram.